Most people think attraction disappears because feelings change, but a lot of the time, it changes much earlier than that. It changes the moment someone realizes they can predict you emotionally, the moment every reaction becomes automatic. Every explanation becomes expected. Every emotional response arrives exactly on schedule. Because certainty changes the way people value attention. And most people destroy their own presence without noticing it. Not by being toxic, not by being cold, but by over-explaining every shift the second tension appears. The moment someone pulls away a little, they rush to fix it. The moment a reply feels different, they panic and start clarifying things. And ironically, that reaction creates the exact emotional distance they were trying to prevent. Because people don't only react to words, they react to emotional stability, to pressure, to unpredictability, to whether your emotional state depends on their behavior. That's what changes the dynamic, not the paragraph, not the reassurance, not the explanation. And most people never realize the shift happened because it looks small at first. It starts with tiny moments, a delayed reply, a different tone, less excitement, shorter conversations. Nothing dramatic, just enough uncertainty to make you feel uncomfortable. And that discomfort exposes almost everything. Because the average person cannot sit inside uncertainty quietly, they need immediate emotional resolution. So they start explaining, "Did I do something wrong? You've been acting different lately. I just feel like something changed." And the moment that happens, the entire emotional frame shifts. Now the conversation is no longer natural. Now it becomes management, monitoring, reassurance, emotional maintenance, and people feel that pressure instantly. Because when someone constantly explains themselves, it communicates something deeper. It says, "My emotional state depends on your response." That changes how people perceive you, especially in modern communication. Texting amplified this problem massively. Years ago, people had space between interactions. Now, people monitor emotional shifts in real time, see notifications, typing indicators, online status, reply speed. Everything became emotional evidence. One slower reply suddenly means danger. One dry message suddenly becomes a crisis. So they start chasing clarity immediately. But here's what's dangerous. The more emotional urgency you show, the less emotionally grounded you appear. And grounded people create emotional gravity. Reactive people create emotional exhaustion. That's why calm behavior changes dynamics so powerfully. Not because silence is manipulation, but because calmness signals independence. It shows you can tolerate uncertainty without collapsing into reaction. Most people can't do that. They need to immediately repair tension the second they feel discomfort. That's why some people become less attractive the more available they become. Not because caring is bad, but because constant accessibility removes tension entirely. There's no space left for curiosity, no room for emotional movement, no uncertainty, and uncertainty is what keeps attention alive. Think about how often people become obsessed with understanding someone once their behavior changes slightly. Not because the behavior was extreme, but because the brain notices interrupted patterns immediately. Human attention is built around contrast. Predictability lowers emotional intensity over time. That's why over-explaining weakens presence. You remove all mystery before the other person even has time to feel your absence. The moment energy changes, you rush in, which means they never experience uncertainty themselves. Only you do, and the imbalance becomes obvious. This is why emotionally reactive people often feel ignored more over time. They accidentally train the dynamic. Every time tension appears, they over-pursue. Every time distance appears, they over-explain. And eventually, the other person stops feeling emotional weight entirely because they already know exactly what happens next. You react, you chase, you explain, you reassure. You collapse the tension instantly. There's no emotional consequence to pulling away anymore, and people value things differently when access becomes automatic. This doesn't only happen in dating either. It happens socially, professionally, even in friendships. The person constantly trying to explain themselves slowly loses psychological presence because certainty reduces attention. People become more aware of what might disappear, not what constantly over-offers itself. That's why absence affects people psychologically. The brain notices disrupted emotional patterns. When someone who normally reacts immediately suddenly becomes calm, people notice, not consciously at first, emotionally. And this is where most people misunderstand emotional control. They think it means pretending not to care. Real emotional control means you don't allow temporary emotions to control your behavior instantly. There's a difference. You can care deeply without reacting impulsively. You can notice distance without immediately demanding reassurance. That emotional restraint changes how people experience you. Because calm people create psychological space. Most people never allow others to feel their absence mentally. They fill every silence immediately. Double text instantly. And eventually, their presence loses impact. Constant emotional availability can slowly become invisible. That's why emotional unpredictability creates stronger memory patterns. Not toxicity, not manipulation, just self-control. There's a reason people remember the person who stayed calm during pressure, because emotional stability is rare now. Most people are emotionally impulsive, especially online. They react publicly, defend themselves publicly. The more someone tries to control perception aggressively, the weaker they often appear. Secure people don't rush to manage every opinion. They understand something emotionally reactive people don't. Not every tension requires immediate action. Emotionally anxious people struggle with silence. Silence feels like loss of control, so they talk too much inside important moments, and too many words often reduce emotional impact, especially during conflict. The strongest emotional moments are usually simple. Imagine two people after tension appears. One sends multiple paragraphs, the other stays calm, responds normally, and doesn't chase certainty. Which person feels emotionally heavier? Usually the calmer one. Because emotional control creates perceived value, people trust stable energy more than emotional urgency. And this becomes even more powerful when someone expected you to react. That moment changes perception fast because now the emotional script breaks. You're no longer behaving predictably, and interrupted expectations create attention immediately. That's why some people become more interested after you emotionally detach. For once, they don't fully know what you're thinking, whether they still affect you, and the human brain pays attention to uncertainty. This is also why people often lose respect after repeated overexplaining. Uncontrolled emotional exposure without stability creates imbalance. Attraction needs emotional breathing room. People need space to wonder sometimes, space to feel your absence. When you explain every emotional fluctuation instantly, you remove all psychological space. Everything becomes emotionally crowded. That's why emotionally centered people often appear more magnetic. They don't force outcomes. They allow moments to breathe. Modern communication rewards impulsive behavior, instant replies, instant opinions. But emotionally disciplined people operate differently. They pause, they observe, they respond intentionally instead of emotionally. And that difference becomes visible very quickly. Anyone can appear confident when everything feels secure. The real shift happens during uncertainty. During distance, some people collapse into reaction, others remain grounded. And the grounded person almost always controls the emotional tone. Human beings detect emotional shifts constantly beneath the surface. Tone, timing, pressure, neediness, restraint. Certainty, sometimes explanation, creates less respect. Because constant explaining can communicate insecurity underneath the logic. Presence increases when reactions decrease. That's the paradox. The moment you stop explaining, people start observing you more carefully, because now your attention feels intentional. Your silence has contrast. Your calmness carries weight. Your reactions feel earned. The moment you stop trying to control every perception, you become harder to control, and people feel that difference immediately, because emotional stability always communicates something powerful. It says, I can handle uncertainty without losing myself. And in a world addicted to emotional reaction, that energy becomes impossible to ignore. If this made you see things differently, subscribe.